So just while everyone's thinking of their key question, I've just got one to kick off. So some have been submitted before for today, so some of them might have been sent to us when they hadn't seen the content. So the first one, Peter, to you, is how do you see AI and automation impacting job roles and skill requirements in the next 5 years?
Yeah, great question. It's quite an interesting one. I honestly think that you'll start to put AI skills on people's job skills requirement. People will start putting in that they have use cases and knowledge on using AI tools in the workplace, and it'll be on their CVs. But also I think it will be interesting because I think when we talked about the company survey piece on our speech earlier, I think you'll be utilizing the team further to ask them, well, what role does AI play in our business, and what can we use AI in our business for moving forward? And I honestly think that you'll at least have 2 departments that are almost fully embraced in AI in your business within 5 years, if you're one of the early majority or late majority, whatever. I would dare say, give it 10 years, I would say that AI will probably be in 50% of your business, if not more.
I think it's really important. You said it earlier, actually. I think it's going to be really interesting how AI augments those human capabilities and makes us all more efficient in what we do. So, yeah, absolutely. John, a quick question for you. What are the most common types of smart spaces in which industries are adopting most rapidly? So, you know, we talked about a plethora of options and use cases, but what are Cisco seeing as sort of the main thrust of adoption?
It's a good question. It's cross-industry, to be honest. So we're seeing take-up in healthcare, in education, in carpeted space, in transport. If we look at a couple of use cases in particular, we talked about transport and national rail or network rail earlier, but in hospitals, being able to understand aggressive behaviour, for example, in A&E, trips and falls, in care homes. Education, we talked about vape detection, but what about the environmental condition of a classroom? There's evidence to suggest that poor air quality, poor light, excessive noise has a detrimental effect on kids' learning. So, you know, we're seeing pockets of opportunity all over. So we talked at length about the carpeted space, but really across industry.
And do you think people are linking it really into sort of ESG strategies and really about sustainability in the workplace as well? Is that absolutely coming to the fore?
Yeah. And part of the portfolio that I represent, we have sensors to monitor power consumption. We have the tools to be able to set schedules to turn things off automatically when they're not being used. So again, to your point, being able to automate some of that power management.
Yeah, brilliant. Good. Ryan, one for you. So this question came in. So when should a private business consider outsourcing the cybersecurity to a managed security partner? And how can they evaluate potential partners? So if we're sitting here thinking, well, actually, we haven't got that capability in-house, we might want to be thinking about outsourcing it. What would you advise in the steps to that process?
Okay, so I think there's a few things to consider there. Just an evaluation of the internal team, expertise in-house, any gaps in knowledge, any gaps in skill set. I think it sort of feeds into, from a cybersecurity standpoint, looking at things like a BCP, incident response plan, and evaluating whether as an organisation you're confident in order to work through those scenarios. In terms of looking at external providers, my advice, having worked at an MSP previously, would be to speak to the clients and just understand what they do and how they can complement your existing team or potentially replace your existing team. Sort of forgot what the question was now.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. It's about how people would choose that provider. But I think the other thing to think about, of course, is that ROI today as well as in the future? Because I think, as we've said, that cyber threat is changing by the hour, by the day. So you might have the infrastructure and the resources to deal with it today, but what does it look like in 2 years' time, and therefore whether you should move? And one small question I was just going to ask, is it ever advisable, do you think, for a company to pay a ransom?
Really good question. NCSC would advise you must never pay the ransom. I'm probably a little bit out of date, but I think they were talking about trying to bring in some legislation so it's actually illegal for a UK business. I've not heard any more on that recently, but at CyberLab, we would obviously strongly against making a ransomware payment as well. However, I do appreciate that organisations are desperate. They're in a situation where they cannot access their data, and can they keep the doors open? Can they keep the lights on? In my previous role at a MSP, we were approached by a business, quite a big furniture wholesaler, and they'd had 2 ransomware attacks within 3 months. The first ransomware attack, they paid the ransom almost immediately. This was maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I think the ransom amounts were smaller, but I think it was maybe still a high 5-figure number that they paid. They got most of the data back, but I think every file of a particular format they'd lost, maybe PDFs, so all the PDFs that had been recovered, they weren't able to open. There's question marks in terms of if you have then made that ransomware payment, if your details are then shared on any lists on the dark web as organisation will pay ransom, and maybe your details are sold on again, and maybe another gang would maybe try more aggressively to attack you a second time because they know that you made the payment the first time round. So this client were attacked for a second time in 3 months, and they lost another chunk of data, and they came to us and said, the MD of the business said, I'm absolutely terrified that if we have a third ransomware attack, I'm not sure we can keep the business running. He said, if I don't know what stock I've got in the warehouse, what's going out, what's coming in, I'm not sure we can keep the wheels in motion. So it's a really, really tricky one. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer, because
it's like dealing with the devil, but I suppose it comes down to business continuity and that ROI in terms of that piece.
I know somebody that paid one, and then they couldn't unlock them because the threat actor moved on to somebody else, and he had the code.
Oh, right.
And they were saying this is ridiculous, and it's like with the criminals, they haven't got any, you know what I mean? It was just that illusion that they were dealing with somebody professional, and they were going to get to unlock them.
I think there aren't any promises that you are going to get all of your data back. I've heard horror stories of companies who've paid the ransom and haven't got anything back, haven't received that key that they needed. Other companies have paid everything back. Other companies, as I mentioned, have paid the ransomware and had their systems partially restored. Lost my train of thought there now, but...
That's why important backup is needed.
Yeah. That's the point I was going to make, yeah. So I think what always amazes me is what we're talking about here is the organisations unable to recover their environment. Yeah. And how many large organisations are unable to recover their environments. And in my MSP role, the number of customers who were receiving these emails every day, your backups have completed successfully, and the IT manager thinking, okay, fantastic, we have sound backups. Without any testing, it's only when they actually come to try to recover their environment and they realise, oh, okay, well, the backup was completing, but it wasn't where it should be. So I think it is always surprising how ill-equipped some large organisations are to recover their environments when they need to. And that's essentially what we're talking about. The reason those organisations are in that situation where they're forced to pay a ransom is because they can't recover their estate.
Brilliant, thank you. And just before I open to the floor, so Grace, one for you. I think many companies are struggling to know what the best workplace strategy is. You know, you hear the big brands like Amazon mandating everyone going back to work, and I suppose there are lots of businesses that are really still unsure about whether they've got the right strategy. What advice would you give about how a company might determine the right strategy for themselves?
I think I'd start with feedback. So I'd ask your people, you know, if you're asking your people what they want, their preferences, their concerns, instantly you're getting buy-in from the people. They're feeling listened, they're feeling valued. I'll be evaluating your job roles. So look at what job roles you've got across the company. You know, is there any reason why your developer needs to come into the office? It may be that you feel your customer-facing teams need to. I'd also be looking at your metrics, so your reporting. Are you able to, if you were thinking of a home-based model, have you got the reporting and the structure in place to be able to report on performance and metrics? And I'd say trial it. If you're not sure, you can give it a pilot. You know, do it for 3-6 months, see how it's going, and go from there, really. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I think that's just something to develop on, actually. Ryan, we talked a little bit, you scared us all blind in terms of the phishing attacks and the risks. I'd just be quite interested if you could give us a summary of the services and capability that you've got within CyberLab to help mitigate some of these risks, just as a bit of an overview of what's in your portfolio, because it's quite extensive and I think worth just sharing.
Sure. So the history of the business, as I mentioned, was what was 3 separate limited companies, consolidated and rebranded as CyberLab. So a team within the business focus on those tech and software solutions. So we sell an awful lot of Sophos and Mimecast and a 24/7 support wrap around those products as well. We have the Armadillo team, which is a team of pen testers, 14 pen testers, Crest accredited, Check accredited, some of the smartest minds in the industry. And then to complement those 2 services, we have what we call CyberLab version 1, so that the cybersecurity as a service portal we brought to the table was how we can start to wrap some of these services together in this automated cloud portal where we provide training, phishing, vulnerability scanning and dark web within an automated platform.
And I think the other thing, of course, is that sort of proactive assessment and posture assessment around security. So some good work there, even to have that initial discussion and almost have a balanced scorecard about, you know, where you are and where the gaps might be. So yeah, excellent. Anybody else got any questions? No, let me just see if I've covered. I've got a couple more. So, okay, one for you, Grace, actually. So with the boundaries between work and personal life really blurring, particularly in a home working environment, how do you think companies can encourage employees to maintain a healthy work-life balance?
I think, you know, flexible working, it rears its head all the time, doesn't it? You know, flexible working laws, they changed earlier this year. I think we've really embraced flexible working. I think, you know, you need to really look at the whole picture. If someone submits a flexible working request, are you looking at those 8 reasons for refusal and trying to find your own reason for refusing it? Again, trial it. It's basic things like annual leave. You know, we've got some people in the business that just don't take it. I'm like, take your annual leave. I think question in terms of home life. I think it's making sure people have got the boundaries at home. If they are working at home, close the door on your office. For me, I have to shut my laptop lid every night. If I don't shut my laptop lid, I'm in work mode. As soon as the kids get home, I'm like, right, I'm mum. Do you know what I mean? So it's make sure those boundaries are there. I think it's making sure your benefits package is supporting your people. So, you know, we're really proud that our benefits package supports our people's health and well-being, and we'd like to think that was both in work and outside of work as well. So I think it's really healthy to have a boundary between home and work, especially if you are either home-based or hybrid as well.
And I think, for me, certainly, that whole assessment around how you are set up at home to work productively is really important.
Yeah.
You know, whether it comes to chair, ergonomics of how you're sitting at desk, it's really important.
If we have a new starter, you know, they're not getting logged on until they've done their workstation assessment. You know, we've got some people that are working from the kitchen table. Well, let's get you a desk or a chair or a footstool or whatever it is that's going to make you comfortable.
Brilliant.
It's basics, really, yeah.
Good. And I've got one last question so to you, Peter. We talked a lot about the benefits of AI. And the potential productivity gains that companies can get. What would you say is the key risk to AI if you look at private business?
I think the risk of AI is always going to be the data. It always comes down to the data. Everyone's unsure because data predominantly is the main energy that AI needs to function. If there's no data, AI can't function effectively. So I would say that the data is critical, so making sure that, like I've seen businesses adopt AI and, you know, they're like, oh, why is it producing this and why is it producing that? And it's because it's people are asking questions and it's producing data. The last time it was ever mentioned was over 6-7 years ago because they've never archived their data. You know, data kind of comes as we'll protect the outside of the business, we'll make sure that people are not breaking in and whatnot, but when they actually get in and they look at the data, most businesses have not got their data structured in a format that's easily found for many people. So I would say that is the biggest risk, is that if your data is not tidy, it's not in its own, file permissions and anything that's no longer required. You can set up policies that say that if this file or folder hasn't been accessed by an individual anywhere in the business, either internally or even externally, for the past year and a half, you alert an IT admin or an administrator to say, do you want to go and have a look to see if you need this data anymore so you can correctly dispose of it? But I think that's the most critical thing, is if you're putting labeling on your data to sensitivity labels and things like that, that's probably the biggest thing that you need to, that's going to take the bulk of your work of getting ready for AI. Because when you have your data in such a structured way and it's only for the right people, that's it, your take off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important, that sort of readiness phase, and we're working on readiness assessments that we can share with customers. We've got teams of consultants that can really help with that first step into the foray of AI and how we protect the data. So that's great. Right, anyone got any last questions before I sort of round up? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so just one from a customer that's not made it today. He's got a managed IT company that look after his IT side, but he doesn't understand or know a lot about cybersecurity. And what he kind of does, he leaves it with them, but is there anything he could do in order to review that? And if so, how much would that cost in relation to reviewing it?
Do you want to answer what he could do, and I'll perhaps touch on the cost?
So in terms of, they have an IT provider but haven't got any outsourced cyber expertise. Where are the gaps? Understanding where the gaps are. So I think, as Oliver mentioned, we would conduct a posture assessment and just understand where are the gaps within the organisation. What are they doing well? What are they doing not so well? What are they haven't they started, or are they really poor at? So I think we work with lots of clients who have either internal IT or outsourced IT, and I think it's just about setting the boundaries in terms of who's doing what, who has access to what. That answers the question? I don't know.
And I think, sorry, Steve.
Yeah, can I just chip in? I think for me, I'm the COO of Chess, obviously responsible for service systems. Hello. Yes, thank you. Getting an accreditation in place for me would be a really good place to start. So if you're whoever's providing your IT, you should have at least CE or CE+. We've gone down the 27001 route because we think it's a better standard for us, and obviously because we do security as well, it's reputationally very bad for us if we get done in. But certainly I think getting an accreditation in place for that company would be a great move, because at least then they're externally audited. And if their internal IT company can't provide that service, we could certainly help with that process. So that's what I'd do.
The other thing I was just going to mention as well, so I had a very similar situation. So I'm a governor of our local school, and one of the things that I sort of focused on was around the IT, and we talked about a similar thing. He'd outsourced, the school head had outsourced, they were a MAT, so they'd outsourced everything to a provider. And I just said to him, when was the last time you did a pen test, an independent pen test of your assessment and where the vulnerabilities might be? And the reality was, he'd never done it. So he'd just taken what that IT provider had said to him was his protection, and it had never been tested. So potentially that independent penetration test might be just doing your homework proactively. And of course, in terms of cost, it's as long as a piece of string, because depending on the complexity of the organisation, the number of people, it differs. But actually what we can do is assess what those requirements would be with the customer and tailor the solution and proposal to them to do it. So, I think there are a number of different ways that we could help that customer really, I suppose, independently verify that what he's getting is good value. Okay. Cool. Okay, thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's great. Right, so